Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, thank you for tuning in. My name's Stephen Milner and I am a landscape photographer from New Zealand, and I predominantly shoot film photography, and this is my Mamiya 7. So in today's video we're going to be doing a review of this camera and the system in general, and I've been shooting with this camera now for nearly a year, so I kind of think I've had a lot of use with it and I'm in a position to give quite a reasonable review. Now this camera is well known in the industry for being a great camera, and it's that good that I felt obliged to do some notes. So I've got some notes here on my computer and we're going to go through those, and hopefully I'm going to give you a good overview of what this camera is actually about and what it's really capable of. So like I said, I've had this camera for about a year now and I've used it extensively for my own portfolio work and also for content on this channel. So I encourage you to check some of those videos out if you haven't already done so, and also check out my Facebook page where you can see lots of images that I've taken with this camera, and also my Instagram page. I've also quite enjoyed using this camera for photography with my family, and I'm going to show you a slideshow soon that's going to show some of my landscape photography images and some shots of my family. So in a second there's going to be a short slideshow of some of the images that I've taken with this camera, but before I get into that I just want to quickly cover off some of the things I'm going to talk about in this video. So I'm going to go over the general use and features of this camera. I'm also going to talk about some of the lens options available. Then I'm going to get into why I like this camera system, but I'm also going to cover off some of the shortcomings that I think are of this system. And then to finish off, I'm going to talk about why I think you should choose this system. So I hope you enjoyed that slideshow, and before we get into some of the finer details of this camera system, I just want to quickly give a bit of a history of the camera system. Now, this camera system started off with a Mamiya 6 that was released in 1989, and that camera is a very different camera to this system, although it's based on the same platform, but it's actually a 6x6 camera, whereas the 7 and the 7 II is a 6x7. Now the 7 came in 1995, and it was very much orientated towards street photography and landscape photography, and then in 1999 the 7 II came, and that had some slight improvements which I'll go over shortly. So the other thing to mention in terms of the differences between the Mamiya 6 and the Mamiya 7, apart from the frame size, is that on the Mamiya 6 this kind of centre bit here and the lens retracts into the body, which makes it more compact and really ideal for travel photography. And then the other thing to mention is there's not as many lenses available for the 6 as there is for the 7. So this is the Mamiya 7 system in a bit more of a close-up view, and as I've already said, it's a 6x7 medium format rangefinder camera. Now I'm just going to go through and talk about the general features and use, and I want to start by talking about the ergonomics. And as you can see, it's quite a big camera and my hands are quite big, and this is the grip here, and I can hold it in my hand easily without any problem. The fingers just kind of slide in here, and I find the ergonomics to work really well, even with the body and the lenses. So with it being a rangefinder, you'll see these three windows on the top of the camera, and this is the viewfinder, and this is the rangefinder system, and the rangefinder system actually has a light meter built into the system. So with the rangefinder system, it has an auto parallax correction, and the frame lines are set to the lens being used on the body. So when you actually put a lens on the body, the frame lines in the viewfinder, which is here, will automatically set to the lens, and with the parallax, when you focus the lens, the frame lines move to adjust for parallax. So like I said, the camera has a built-in light meter here, and when you are focusing and you're looking through the viewfinder here, it will have an LED display that displays the shutter speed that you should be using, but it also tells you whether you are overexposed or underexposed. So in terms of loading the film, this is how you open the door here. There's a little button and you just press it and it pops open. And as you can see, this is the back of the camera. And it's quite easy to load. You have these little switches here. And you just undo those. And as you can see, there's the bottom of these pins have popped out. And I don't have a film loader at the minute, but this is a film spool. And you just basically slide it in there and it pops in quite easy. You push those pins up and then you would pull across the film and load it into the barrel that's already in there. So what I might do in a separate video is a tutorial on how to put film in the camera. So anyway, in terms of changing lenses, that's fairly easy. There's a button here that you press and the cap twists off, and then you select a lens, and here we have the 80mm lens, and you basically just line up the pins, put it down in the body and just rotate it and it locks into position. So now when we look for the viewfinder, the frame lines will have changed to suit this lens. So in terms of setting the exposure, everything's ergonomically there, ready for you to do so. In terms of the lens, we have the aperture ring, and that's always on the front of these lenses. We have the ISO dial, which is here. It's built into the exposure dial, and you basically just lift up. You lift up the outer bit and rotate it, and you can set the ISO, and the ISO runs from 25 all the way up to, hang on a second, I've never actually been this high on this camera, all the way up to 1600. So here we have the exposure dial, and there's a couple of options here for you to choose. You can be completely in manual mode and you can select the shutter speed that you want, or you can go into bulb mode if you want to do anything longer than 4 seconds. And in terms of the fastest shutter speed, it goes all the way up to 1/500th of a second. It also has exposure settings, and it's an aperture priority system, so you can put it on A and the light meter will determine the shutter speed for you based on the aperture that you've set manually. So it has exposure lock, and the way that this works is that when you are focusing, you will put the rangefinder spot in the viewfinder on an area in the frame that you want to calculate the exposure for. You half press the shutter, and then while it's still half pressed, you move the frame into the area that you actually want to take the photo, and then you press the actual shutter button fully, and doing that way it remembers the exposure that you want. So the other thing to mention is that while it's in automatic exposure mode, you have the ability to do exposure compensation, and that's what this little button here is for. So you would press that and then you just rotate it, and as you can see here, you can go +2 all the way up to +2 and all the way to -2. So here we have the on off button, and also this is the shutter release button. One thing I will say is that when the marker is on red, that means it's off, and when you flick it to the white, that means it's on. The shutter button's quite light to touch and dead easy to use. And here we have the ability to plug in a remote shutter if you want to do long exposures, anything more than 4 seconds in bulb mode, or you just want the ability to release the shutter without touching the camera. And the other thing just to obviously mention that this is the winder. It's one wind to advance for every film frame, and it works quite well. Also, when you do that, it cocks the shutter in the lens. So in terms of focusing these, it's dead easy. It's just completely manual, and on the lenses you have meter and feet, so if you want to do the averaging approach to focusing, it's quite easy to do that, and I use that all the time, and I find it to be quite accurate. So the other thing to mention, when it comes to making an exposure and releasing the shutter, it's important to note that there is a curtain that sits across the film plane, and to release that you press this button here, and then to push it back, and you'll need to do this when you change the lens, and I'll show you this in a second, you just rotate that. What I'll do is I'll open up the back so you can actually see this operating. And as you can see, there's like a cloth curtain there, and I press that button and it opens up, and then when you want to push it back, you rotate this thing here and it brings it back across. And that's quite important to remember, because with it open you can't take the lens off, so your film's always protected. So, and then to take the lens off you have to rotate that back over, and then we can actually take the lens off. So the other thing to mention is that this camera has the ability to shoot panoramics using 35mm film, and there's an adapter you have to buy, and it basically just sits in the back here, and you can load a 35mm film canister and then shoot panoramics. And the other feature in relation to that is that when you look through the viewfinder, and even any of these external viewfinders, it has the panoramic lines there for you to focus, which is another great feature. If you're the sort of person that likes to use a flash or use a PC sync, here is the flash hot shoe here, and also the PC sync is down here on the bottom. The other thing to mention as well, if you want to do self-portraits or use a timer, if you don't have a remote shutter, there's a 10-second self-timer here on the front. So this camera takes both 120 and 220 film formats, and the way to do that is you press down on this plate here and it rotates, and then you can load in your 220 format. And also when you do that, this number here on the back will change. So when you shoot in 120 format you get 10 exposures, and when you shoot in 220 format you get 20 exposures. And when it comes to the battery goes in here, and it takes a 4SR44 or a 2CR1/3 battery, and they are still available, and they generally last quite long. This one in here has been in there for a year, but I've read that they last for 2 or 3 years without any problem. The battery does power the meter and also the shutter in the lenses. So the other thing to mention quickly, if you're the sort of person that likes Polaroids, and there's an ability to get an aftermarket Polaroid back for these cameras. I've never seen one, I've never used one. I've had a look online, and what I can see is that there's actually a complete back replacement, and this door comes off, and you actually put on a new door, and there's a device that sits on the back of this that enables you to do Polaroids. In terms of the camera strap, I haven't really used this that much, but it's actually the holders for the camera strap on the top here, so when you're holding it around your neck, it will dangle down this way. That's quite handy for when you're loading film, because it can just open up that way and then you can load your film and close it. So like I said earlier, in 1999 Mamiya released the Mamiya 2, which included some improvement features, and one of those features was the addition of a neck strap loop here that enabled you to hold the camera normally around your neck. The other feature that was added was a double exposure capability. It was normally on the back here. They also improved the brightness of the rangefinder, and that was a common complaint with the 7. In bright conditions the frame lines were not always visible, so they ended up putting a polarizer on the rangefinder, and it just so happens that my version of the 7 has had that modification done to it. So the other thing to mention is that they improved the curtain winder, and as you can see here, this is actually the winder from the Mamiya 7 II, so my camera has also been upgraded with that feature, but that was another improvement that they made to the camera. So that's a brief overview of the general features and use of the Mamiya 7, and now we're going to talk quickly about lenses. So I have 4 lenses, and here they are. I have the 50mm lens, the 80mm lens, the 150mm lens and the 210mm lens. Now these are fantastic lenses. They're well renowned in the industry for producing beautiful images with great contrast and colour. So the 50mm is a wide angle lens, and in 35mm it's the equivalent of about 25mm. This lens is the lens that I use most of the time, and it comes with this external finder. So when I put this lens on the camera, it doesn't work with a built-in viewfinder, and I have to use an external viewfinder to frame up the shots. So this is the 80mm lens, and in 35mm format it's the equivalent of around 40mm, and this lens works with a built-in viewfinder and rangefinder system. This is the 150mm lens, and in 35mm equivalent it's 75mm, and this one works with a built-in viewfinder and rangefinder as well. This is the 210mm lens, in 35mm equivalent this one is the equivalent of 105mm, and this one does not work with the built-in viewfinder or rangefinder system, and to frame up this lens you need this external viewfinder. When you want to focus it, you have to rely on the depth of field scale on the lens here and go with the averaging approach. So these are the 4 lenses that I own, and I will do separate reviews on each of these lenses individually in future videos. The other thing to mention is there are a couple of other lenses available. There's a 43mm lens, which is the equivalent of 21mm in 35mm format, and that one also needs an external viewfinder. And then there is a 65mm lens, which is the equivalent of around about 30mm, and that one works with a built-in viewfinder. So that was a bit of an up-close and personal look at the Mamiya 7 system, and I hope you got something from that. So now I thought it'd be quite good to talk about why I like this system, and I've made a few notes here on my computer. I'm going to be referring to them as we go along. And so I guess the first thing to mention of why I like this system is because it's a rangefinder system, and what that means is that it's quite a compact system. You know, there's no mirror in there that you would get with your typical SLR type camera system. So it makes it for quite a compact and lightweight system. And then the lenses are quite small as well. So in terms of the lenses, I've already said that the optics in these lenses are amazing. But the other thing to mention is that this camera body doesn't have the shutter mechanism built in the body itself. They're actually built into every lens. So in each lens there's a leaf shutter, and the lens mechanism is quite small, which means that when you're taking images it doesn't make that much noise, which is great for street photography. It's also great that the system's got interchangeable lenses. You know, there's a number of different lens options available. They're all prime lenses, there's no zoom lenses. And that's great for this system because some of the competitors are fixed lens cameras. In terms of the light meter, I find it's very accurate. In many cases it's very close to my external spot meter that I use for my slide film. So the final thing to mention of why I like this camera system, it's really easy to use. The controls are just at your fingertips. The ergonomics are good. It's quite rugged and well built. It's lightweight, and I really appreciate that because I do multiple day hikes and I take my camera with me on those trips. And you know, the image quality is excellent, it's second to none, it's well renowned. This camera's got a reputation of being the best camera ever made, in particular for film cameras. So even though this camera has a great reputation of producing great images, there are a few shortcomings that I want to touch on. So the first thing to mention is that the body of the camera is plastic itself, and if you drop it, there's a high chance of it cracking, and which will lead to light leaks. There's no way of changing the back like some of the other film cameras like the Hasselblad or the RZ67. You have the ability to take off the back and change the films, where once you've got your film loaded in this camera you're stuck with that film until you've used it. The viewfinder in this camera is great, but if you don't have one like mine that's been upgraded with some of the features from the Mamiya 7 II camera, the frame lines in the viewfinder are actually quite dim and hard to see. And the other thing to mention is the LED display in there for the over and under exposure and the exposure settings. It's not always that easy to see. You have to be quite careful in where you put your eye because at certain angles you can't actually see it. It needs a battery, and batteries need replacing, so if it ever fails while you're out in the field that'd be quite unfortunate, and if you didn't have a spare with you at the time then you would be stuck because the camera wouldn't work. The lenses are great, however they are quite slow. The fastest aperture setting that you will get in any of the lenses is f4, and most of them are either f4 or f4.5. So if you're the sort of person that likes to shoot portraits, or you're looking for something that has low light performance for shooting your family with, then perhaps this isn't the best camera for you. Not all the lenses work with the viewfinder system, and for the 50mm lens and the 43mm lens and the 210mm lens you need these external viewfinders, and it's just another thing you have to carry. And with the 50mm lens there's a dedicated viewfinder. If you've got the 43mm lens then you need another one. This one works with the 210 and the 150mm lens, although you don't necessarily need it for the 150mm lens, it has the frame lines in there anyway. So yeah, it's just another thing to carry, it's extra weight. I don't mind them because I will use them to frame up my shots while my camera's still in my bag, so I generally carry these in my pockets when I'm out in the field, and I use them as compositional tools. Because it's a rangefinder system and you're not actually looking through the lenses, it's virtually impossible to get an accurate composition. And that's okay, it just means that you have to allow a little bit of wriggle room when you're framing up your shots to make sure that you get everything that you want in the actual frame. And the other thing to mention is that if you're the sort of guy that uses filters like I do, you have to kind of guess where you put the filter on the film holder to get it lined up to the horizon if you use grad filters. It's okay, you just have to get used to it, but you know, if you're quite precise with those types of things then and you want to be able to look through the lenses, then you're not going to be able to do that on this camera. And the final thing to mention is the price of this system in the used market. And if you have a look on eBay you'll find that this system is quite expensive, and in terms of the camera body, if you want one like this one that's had some of the upgrades done to it, you're kind of looking at $2,500 US. And the lenses are not cheap either. You know, for the popular lenses like the 80mm and the 50mm and the 65mm, you're kind of talking about $700 US. The 150mm lens and the 210mm lens are a bit cheaper. They're normally about $300 US. But, you know, as a complete system, it's generally quite expensive. If you want to save some money, I'd go for the Mamiya 6. That's generally a little bit cheaper. And if you want to go for the ultimate kind of collector's item and you want to go for the Mamiya 7 II, then that's cool, but you're going to be paying more than even this system for that camera because that's quite popular. So that is a brief overview of the Mamiya 7 system and the lenses. And if you're going to buy this system, then I thought it'd be quite interesting to go over some of the alternatives for you to consider before you go ahead and buy it. So there's 4 cameras that I consider to be alternatives to the system, and they are rangefinder cameras. And the first one is the Fujifilm GM670, which is an interchangeable rangefinder 6x7 camera, and it's quite a rare camera. You can pick them up on eBay for around about $400 US. There's limited lens ranges, and some of the lenses are autofocus. The next camera is a Fujifilm GW670. They cost about $1,200 US. Now there is a fixed lens, 90mm, but again it's a 6x7 rangefinder camera, and it's just another alternative. If you like the 90mm lens, then that's a good option for you. The next one is the Makina 67, and that's a fixed 80mm lens, and it costs around $1,900 US. Now that's a 6x7 camera, but it operates in a similar way to the Mamiya 6, and the actual front element of the camera pops out. It's a fixed lens, it's quite expensive for what you're getting, but it's another alternative to consider. And the final alternative camera to consider is the Fujifilm GF670, which has a fixed 80mm lens and costs around $2,700 US. Now that's a bellows camera. The lens actually tucks away into the camera body and pops out. It's quite expensive for what you're getting. It's not interchangeable. So when you look at the options out there, for the money that you're paying, you know, and having interchangeable lenses and a 6x7 rangefinder format, I think it's arguably that the Mamiya 7 or the Mamiya 7 II is probably the best option out there. So why should you choose this camera? And I guess it'd be quite good to talk about why I actually chose this camera. And I guess the first thing to mention is, with, you know, hands down, is image quality. This camera is all about image quality. If you want the best image quality out of your film photography images, then this camera is definitely going to give you that. The second thing why I chose this camera was the weight. Now it's quite a light camera system. Being a rangefinder system, it's quite portable and quite light. And the other thing is reputation. This camera's got a great reputation out there, and it's also got quite good residual value. You know, I wanted a camera system that I could invest in, but then when I go on to sell it, it's going to retain its value. And that's another reason why I bought this camera. But, you know, hands down, buy this. If you want the best image quality out there, then buy this camera system, and I can guarantee you won't be disappointed. So if that's not enough to convince you, I encourage you to go check out some of the professional photographers that have used this camera system. And the first guy is a landscape photographer from Scotland. He's called Bruce Percy. He's spent a decade using this camera, and you can go and check out some of his work on his website. The other guy that I want to mention is a guy called Martin Parr. He's a photojournalist, and again he's used this camera system extensively with his work. So that brings us to the end of my review of the Mamiya 7, and I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I've been able to provide some decent information to you if you are thinking about investing in the system. If you would like to be notified of the review videos that I'm going to do of these lenses that I own, then please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, and you will be notified when I upload these videos. If you have experience in using this camera, or if you want to ask a question about the camera system, then please leave a comment in the section below. That'd be greatly appreciated. If you would like to see some more of my images from using this system, then I encourage you to check out my Facebook page and my Instagram page. If you would like to see some more videos of me using this camera out in the field, then I encourage you to check out some of the other videos in my YouTube feed. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.